Hi everyone, my name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old and I never thought I'd be posting something like this online. I really didn't. For the longest time, I was the kind of person who would listen to true crime podcasts or watch these insane family drama videos and think, how does anyone let it get that far? Why wouldn't you just pack a bag, walk out the front door, and never look back? But trauma doesn't announce itself with a warning bell. It doesn't walk into your life wearing a mask and holding a weapon. It creeps in. It disguises itself as love, as deep concern, as intense protection. It wraps itself around you so slowly, so gently, that by the time you realize you can't breathe, you are already entirely trapped. And the person suffocating you is the exact same person you trust to keep you safe. I am sharing this today because I know, with absolute, terrifying certainty, that there is another woman out there watching this right now who feels like she is losing her grip on reality. A woman who is being told, day after day, that her memory is wrong, that her perception is flawed, that her reality isn't real. A woman who is being relentlessly punished for crimes she never committed. If that is you, if you are sitting there late at night wondering if you really are the crazy one, I need you to listen to every single word I am about to say. Turn the volume up. Because the man who is telling you that you are losing your mind might just be hiding a secret so dark, so incredibly dangerous, that it could violently destroy your entire life. Before I get into the security cameras, the private investigators, the stalking, the burner phones, and the absolute explosive, violent nightmare that my marriage devolved into, I need to take you back to the very beginning. I need you to understand exactly who Mark was. Because monsters don't start out as monsters. If they did, we would all run away. They start out as your soulmate. They start out as the answer to every prayer you've ever had. I met Mark exactly 6 years ago at a charity gala for local animal shelters. I was 26 years old at the time, working as a junior graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing firm in the city. I was fiercely independent, happy, surrounded by an amazing group of girlfriends, and completely focused on building my career. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was wearing a cheap dress I bought on clearance, sipping a watered-down cocktail near the back of the room, just trying to make it through a corporate networking event. And then Mark walked up to me. He was 30 years old, a senior financial analyst for a major, highly prestigious wealth management firm. From the absolute second he introduced himself, he was intoxicating. He was charming, articulate, impeccably dressed, incredibly handsome, and he had this laser-focused attention that made you feel like you were the only person existing on the entire planet. When he looked at you, it felt like the rest of the room completely vanished. We talked for 3 hours that night. He didn't talk about himself. He asked me questions about my art, my ambitions, my family, my childhood. He made me feel seen in a way I had never experienced before. Our courtship was an absolute whirlwind. It was the kind of sweeping, cinematic romance that makes your single friends roll their eyes out of pure jealousy. He sent massive, extravagant bouquets of white roses to my office desk just because it was a Tuesday. He booked surprise weekend trips to beautiful coastal bed and breakfasts. He remembered every single tiny, insignificant detail I ever mentioned in passing. If I casually mentioned I liked a specific obscure indie band, he would surprise me with front row tickets a week later. If I said I liked the smell of vanilla, my apartment would suddenly be filled with expensive vanilla candles. Within a year of that gala, we were engaged. Within 18 months, we were married in a beautiful, intimate ceremony surrounded by our friends and family. I remember standing at the altar, looking into his eyes as he cried, listening to him promise to protect me, to cherish me, to shield me from the world. Everyone, my parents, my siblings, my best friends, told me I had hit the absolute jackpot. And for the first 3 years of our marriage, I genuinely, fiercely believed I had. We bought a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in a quiet upscale suburb just outside the city limits. It was the kind of neighborhood where people leave their doors unlocked and children ride their bikes in the street until dark. The house had a massive, perfectly manicured backyard, beautiful original hardwood floors, and a huge open-concept kitchen with a white marble island. We would sit there on Sunday mornings, drinking expensive coffee, reading the paper, and planning our future. We talked about having 2 kids. We talked about getting a golden retriever. Everything was perfect. It was flawless. It was almost too perfect. Looking back now, with the absolute agonizing clarity of hindsight, I can see the early microscopic red flags. The tiny, subtle shifts in his behavior that I completely, willfully excused because I was so blindly, desperately in love with the image of the man I thought he was. It started with his intense, almost obsessive need for communication. Now, when you're newly married, texting all the time is normal. But this was different. If I went out to dinner with my girlfriends from work to celebrate a promotion or just to catch up, Mark would text me continuously from the moment I left the driveway. Not aggressive texts. That's how they trick you. They frame it as sweet, attentive concern. Miss you already, beautiful. How's the food? Did you order the pasta? What are you guys talking about right now? When do you think you'll be home? I'm lonely and I want to watch our show. If I didn't reply within 10 or 15 minutes because I was deeply engaged in a conversation, the tone would slightly, subtly shift. The sweetness would harden just a fraction of an inch. Hey, everything okay? You're making me worry. Sarah, are you ignoring me? I guess your friends are more entertaining tonight. Just let me know you're alive. At the time, I thought it was endearing. I honestly did. I would apologize to my friends, excuse myself to the bathroom, and call him just to reassure him. I thought, wow, my husband loves me so much he literally cannot stand being away from me for 2 hours. I thought it was devotion. But it wasn't love. It was surveillance. It was the early, subtle establishment of a psychological perimeter. It was him testing the waters to see how quickly I would drop my life to soothe his manufactured anxiety. By our 4th year of marriage, the perimeter began to shrink dramatically. Mark started making offhand, passive-aggressive, deeply cutting comments about my male coworkers. I had just been promoted to senior art director at my agency, which meant I was working longer hours, attending more client dinners, and collaborating closely with my creative director, a man named David. David was a 50-year-old, happily married man with 3 teenage kids. He treated me like a daughter. He mentored me, pushed me to be better, and was entirely professional. But Mark hated him. He hated the fact that I respected another man's professional opinion. I remember one specific evening. It was a Tuesday. I had worked until 7:30 p.m., finalizing a pitch deck for a major tech client. I came home, exhausted but proud of the work, and found Mark aggressively chopping vegetables at the kitchen island. He didn't look up when I walked in. He just kept chopping, the knife hitting the cutting board with sharp, violent thuds. "Hey, honey," I said, dropping my bags by the door and walking over to kiss his cheek. "Sorry I'm late. The Johnson account took forever to lock down." He pulled his cheek away from my lips before they even connected. He didn't stop chopping. "You and David sure seem to spend a lot of time brainstorming late at the office these days," he said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any warmth. I laughed it off, completely oblivious to the venom pooling in his voice. "Mark, David is practically a senior citizen. We're working on a massive launch. It's strictly professional. You know that." Mark stopped chopping. He slowly put the knife down on the marble counter, turned around, and stared at me. His eyes were dark, cold, and completely empty. "Professional," he repeated, the word tasting like acid in his mouth. "Right. Just make sure you aren't being completely naive, Sarah. Men in his position love taking advantage of young, pretty girls who are desperate to please their bosses. They buy you a late-night coffee, they compliment your work, and before you know it, you're staying at the office until midnight for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with graphic design. I work in the corporate world, Sarah. I see what happens. Don't play the fool." It was a deeply, profoundly insulting comment. It invalidated my hard work, reduced my promotion to a sleazy cliché, and masked his extreme jealousy as paternal concern for my well-being. I was so stunned by the accusation that I actually started defending myself. I started listing the exact times of my meetings. I showed him my emails. I submitted my innocence to his court, and that was my mistake. By defending myself against an absurd accusation, I validated his right to interrogate me. But all of that, the texting, the jealousy, the passive-aggressive comments, was just the prologue. The real nightmare, the true psychological torture, began right after my 31st birthday. It was a cold, rainy Thursday night in November. I was sitting on the sofa in the living room, wearing sweatpants, wrapped in a blanket, reading a thriller novel. Mark was supposedly working late at the financial firm to close out the fourth quarter. It was a perfectly normal, quiet evening. At exactly 9:43 p.m., I heard his car pull into the driveway. But he didn't pull in smoothly. I heard the tires screech slightly on the wet concrete. A few seconds later, the front door violently flew open, the heavy oak slamming against the entryway wall with a massive bang. I jumped off the sofa, my heart instantly spiking into my throat, dropping my book on the floor. Mark didn't call out a greeting. He didn't come into the living room to kiss me. I watched from the archway as he frantically grabbed the door handle, slammed it shut, threw the heavy deadbolt, and then reached up with trembling hands to slide the metal security chain into place. He spun around and walked into the living room. The moment I saw his face, the blood completely drained from my body. He looked absolutely terrified, but also furiously, violently angry. His face was pale, completely washed of color. His tie was loosened, his expensive suit jacket was wrinkled, and his eyes were darting around the room erratically, like a cornered animal waiting for an attack. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving up and down. "Mark?" I asked, taking a hesitant step toward him, instantly alarmed. "Honey, what's wrong? What happened? Did you get into an accident? You look awful." He marched directly over to me, grabbed my cell phone off the coffee table, and shoved it directly into my face. "Who is he, Sarah?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, ragged whisper. I stared at him, completely bewildered, my mind completely blank. "Who is who? Mark, what are you talking about? You're scaring me." "Do not play stupid with me," he yelled suddenly, his voice echoing violently off the high ceilings of the living room, making me physically flinch backward. "Do not stand there and play the innocent, confused little wife. Who is the guy in the dark sedan?" I literally could not process the words coming out of his mouth. "A dark sedan? Mark, you are not making any sense. Have you been drinking? Did something happen at work?" He took another step closer, looming over me, his physical presence overwhelmingly intimidating. His face twisted into an ugly, terrifying sneer of pure disgust. "I pulled onto our street tonight," he spat, pointing a shaking finger toward the front windows, and there was a dark gray or black sedan parked exactly 3 houses down, tucked under the shadow of the oak tree. The engine was running, the headlights were completely off, and the absolute second I pulled into our driveway, it suddenly threw it in gear and sped away down the block. He was watching the house, Sarah. He was sitting out there in the dark, waiting for me to leave, or waiting for you to sneak out. Who the hell is he? I was completely, utterly dumbfounded. My brain tried to apply logic to an illogical situation. "Mark, we live in a massive suburb. People park on the street all the time. Maybe it was an Uber driver waiting for a pickup. Maybe it was an Amazon delivery driver checking an address on his GPS. Why would your brain instantly, automatically jump to the conclusion that I have a secret lover waiting in a getaway car in the rain?" "Because you've been distant," he barked, throwing my phone aggressively back onto the coffee table. It hit the wood with a loud crack. "Because you changed your phone passcode last month. Because you've been dressing up more for work, wearing new perfume. You think I don't see it? You think I'm an idiot? You think I don't know what it looks like when a woman is preparing to leave her husband?" I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. Yes, I had changed my phone passcode, but only because my firm required a mandatory, company-wide security update for our corporate email servers. I had literally complained to him about the IT policy over dinner weeks ago. Yes, I was dressing nicer, because I had just been promoted to senior art director and had to stand in boardrooms and present to major corporate clients. I had explained all of this to him in exhaustive detail. "Mark, we talked about all of that," I said gently, trying desperately to de-escalate the situation. I held my hands up, palms open, trying to show him I wasn't a threat. I honestly thought he was having a severe, stress-induced psychological breakdown from working 80-hour weeks. "I love you. I am completely devoted to you. I am not cheating on you. I barely have time to sleep, let alone orchestrate a massive secret affair. There is no man in a black sedan. Please, just sit down on the sofa. Let me get you a glass of water. Take a breath." He didn't sit down. He didn't take a breath. He paced the hardwood floor of the living room for another hour, continuously walking over to the front windows, peeling back the blinds with 2 fingers, and peering out into the dark, rainy street, his body completely rigid with tension. That night was the catalyst. It was the spark that ignited a 2-year-long descent into absolute, suffocating, paralyzing psychological torture. The very next weekend, without consulting me, without even a conversation, Mark hired a premium residential security company. I woke up on a Saturday morning to the sound of heavy boots walking around the exterior of our house. I walked outside in my robe and found 3 technicians running thick black cables along our roofline. They didn't just install a standard alarm system. They didn't just put a sensor on the door. They installed high-definition, night vision, motion sensor 4K cameras on every single external corner of our property. They put a massive camera facing the driveway, a camera facing the street, a camera covering the entire backyard, a camera pointing down the side alley, and a camera pointed directly at the front porch. I walked back inside, my blood boiling, and found Mark sitting at the kitchen island, drinking coffee, writing a massive check to the security foreman. "What the hell is going on, Mark?" I demanded, crossing my arms over my chest. "Why are there men drilling into our siding?" "It's for our safety," Mark told me smoothly, handing the check to the foreman and thanking him. He didn't look at me until the man left the kitchen. Then, his eyes narrowed. "Since you flatly refuse to be honest with me about who is stalking this property, I have to take extreme measures to protect my home and my assets." I was furious. I felt completely violated. I felt like I was living in a militarized zone. But whenever I tried to argue, whenever I raised my voice and demanded he take them down, he would instantly turn it back around on me, deploying the ultimate weapon of the gaslighter. "Why are you so incredibly upset about the cameras, Sarah?" he would ask, leaning against the counter, his voice dripping with condescending, arrogant suspicion. "If you aren't doing anything wrong, if you aren't sneaking around, you shouldn't have any problem with a little security. Most wives would be thrilled their husband wants to protect them. The only logical reason you would hate these cameras this much is if you're planning on sneaking someone in while I'm at work. Is that it? Are they ruining your logistics?" If you have ever been gaslit by a true, practiced master of psychological manipulation, you know exactly what I felt in that exact moment. It's a paralyzing, suffocating trap. It's a checkmate where every move you make proves their point. If I fought aggressively against the cameras, it proved I was guilty, defensive, and trying to hide my illicit activities. If I accepted the cameras, I was voluntarily submitting to living inside a high-security prison where my own husband was the warden, watching my every move. I chose the path of least resistance. I was so exhausted from fighting, I just surrendered. I foolishly hoped that the cameras would finally, undeniably prove my innocence. I thought, let him watch. Let him see that nothing happens. Let the empty footage cure his paranoia. I was incredibly, painfully wrong. The cameras didn't cure his paranoia. They weaponized it. They fed it. They gave it oxygen. Mark became obsessed with the security footage. He downloaded the main interface app to his personal cell phone, his iPad, and his work computer. He would come home from work, barely say hello to me, and immediately retreat to his home office. He would spend hours sitting in the dark, scrolling back through the daily footage at 2 times speed, scrutinizing every single shadow, every passing car, every mail carrier, every neighborhood dog walker. If an Amazon delivery driver lingered on the porch for 10 seconds too long while scanning a package, Mark would burst out of the office, find me in the kitchen, and demand to know why the driver was looking through the front window. If a car drove past our house twice in 1 hour, he would pause the footage, zoom in on the license plate, and ask me if I recognized the make and model. And then, the internal cameras appeared. I came home from work on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a bag of groceries, completely exhausted from a massive presentation. I walked into the living room to set my purse down, and I saw it. Mounted high in the upper corner of our living room, pointing directly at the sofa and the front door, was a small, black dome camera. I dropped my purse. I walked into the kitchen. Another black dome camera was mounted above the cabinets, angled to perfectly cover the back patio door, the refrigerator, and the kitchen island. I absolutely lost my mind. The dam broke. I called him at work, screaming into the phone. I told him he was crossing a massive, unforgivable, illegal boundary. I told him I felt like an animal in a zoo, being monitored, recorded, and scrutinized in my own sanctuary, the one place on earth I was supposed to feel safe. He rushed home from the office. He didn't apologize. He didn't back down. He walked into the kitchen, his face a mask of grim, terrifying determination. I found a footprint in the mud by the back patio door, Mark said coldly, pointing a finger at the glass door. Someone was standing at the window last night while we were sleeping. Your little boyfriend is getting bold, Sarah. He's getting desperate. If you won't tell him to back off, if you won't end this sick little game, I will catch him on tape and I will completely ruin his life. These cameras stay. There is no footprint, I screamed, tears of pure, unadulterated frustration and helplessness streaming down my face. I looked outside this morning. It rained all night. There is no boyfriend. You are having a severe psychological breakdown, Mark. You need to see a psychiatrist. You need medication. You are destroying our marriage. He stood up, walking slowly over to me. His physical presence was overwhelmingly intimidating. He leaned down, his face inches from mine. Don't you ever, ever call me crazy, he whispered, his voice dangerously low, practically vibrating with malice. I know exactly what you're doing. I know you're trying to manipulate me. I know you're trying to make me think I'm losing my mind, so you can keep sneaking around behind my back and playing the victim. But I am 10 steps ahead of you, Sarah. Always. The next year of my life was a blur of constant, exhausting, terrifying defense. I completely lost myself. I stopped going out with my friends entirely. I completely isolated myself because I knew, with absolute certainty, that if I came home even 10 minutes later than my usual commute time, I would be subjected to a 3-hour interrogation in the living room. I would have to show him my Google Maps location history. I would have to show him my text threads. I stopped wearing makeup on the weekends. I bought baggy, unflattering clothes. I started leaving my cell phone completely unlocked, face up on the kitchen counter at all times, desperately, pathetically trying to offer him total transparency. But it was never enough. It is never enough for a paranoid controller. Because the stalking didn't stop. In fact, according to Mark's frantic updates, it was escalating. He would come home completely unhinged, sweating through his dress shirt, claiming that a dark SUV had aggressively tailgated him on the highway for 10 miles before suddenly exiting. He would find a random piece of trash, a fast food wrapper, a crushed soda can, on our front lawn and claim it was a deliberate marker left by my lover to signal that the coast was clear. Once, a completely blank, unaddressed white envelope was left in our mailbox. No stamp, no name, just an empty envelope. Mark found it when he checked the mail. He walked into the house holding it with a pair of kitchen tweezers, his hands violently shaking, his eyes wide with terror. He screamed at me for 45 minutes, waving the envelope in my face, claiming that my psycho boyfriend was taunting him, leaving messages to show he could get past the cameras. The chronic stress began to destroy me physically. I lost 15 pounds I didn't have to lose. My cheekbones jutted out. The beautiful, thick hair Mark used to love started thinning, falling out in clumps in the shower drain. I developed a permanent tremor in my left hand. I wasn't sleeping. I was operating on maybe 3 hours of broken sleep a night because I would frequently wake up at 3 a.m. to find the bed empty. I would walk out into the hallway and find Mark standing by the living room window in the dark, peering through the wooden blinds into the pitch-black street, muttering to himself, holding a heavy metal flashlight like a weapon. I was trapped in a terrifying, reality-bending paradox. I knew, with absolute, fundamental certainty, that I was not having an affair. I knew there was no secret boyfriend, but Mark's fear seemed so incredibly, undeniably genuine. He wasn't acting like a controlling, abusive husband who just wanted to bully his wife for fun. He was acting like a man who was genuinely, deeply terrified for his physical safety. He was sweating. He was losing weight. He was constantly checking his rearview mirror. He jumped at loud noises. The gaslighting was so thorough, so pervasive, that I actually started to question my own reality. I started to think, what if he is right? What if I actually do have a stalker? What if some deranged, obsessed client from my marketing agency has fixated on me, followed me home, and is secretly targeting my house? What if some psychopath is out there and Mark is taking the brunt of the terror to protect me? I decided I couldn't live in the dark anymore. I couldn't survive another year of this. I couldn't rely on Mark's manic, terrified interpretations of passing cars, blank envelopes, and shadows on a camera feed. I needed objective, undeniable, third-party proof of what was actually happening outside the walls of my house. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I secretly hired a private investigator. I spent hours researching on a secure browser at work. I found a highly reputable investigative firm located deep in the city, run by a retired police detective named Marcus. His website promised extreme discretion and expertise in stalking cases. He was in his late 50s, gruff, no nonsense, and exactly the kind of objective, unemotional professional I desperately needed. I took a massive $5,000 cash advance on an old personal credit card that I had kept from before we were married, an account Mark didn't know about and didn't have access to monitor. I put the cash in an envelope, told my boss I had an emergency dentist appointment, and went to Marcus's office on my lunch break. The office was exactly what you would expect. Dusty blinds, the smell of stale coffee, filing cabinets everywhere. I sat across the desk from Marcus, clutching my purse to my chest, crying hysterically as I explained the entire insane situation. I told him about the military-grade cameras inside and outside the house. I told him about the accusations of infidelity. I told him about the mysterious cars, the blank envelopes, the footprint in the mud, the sheer, unadulterated terror my husband was experiencing, and my own desperate, clawing need to know if someone was actually stalking me. Marcus didn't interrupt. He listened quietly, his face entirely unreadable, taking shorthand notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finally finished, sobbing and exhausted, he put his pen down. He looked at me with a very specific, deeply pitying expression. It was the exact look you give a small child right before you have to tell them their dog died. "All right, Sarah," Marcus said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He leaned back in his worn leather chair and folded his hands. "I'll take the case. I'll put a discreet two-man surveillance team on your house 24/7. I'll run background checks on the license plates of any suspicious vehicles, and I'll put a passive GPS tracker on your husband's Audi. But I need you to do something for me." "Anything," I sniffled, wiping my eyes with a crumpled tissue. "Just tell me what to do." "I need you to brace yourself," he said firmly, leaning forward again, his eyes locking onto mine. "Brace myself for what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "To find out who the stalker is? Do you think it's someone from my work?" Marcus sighed heavily, rubbing his jaw. Sarah, listen to me carefully. In my 25 years of doing domestic investigations, I have seen this exact pattern dozens of times. When a husband suddenly out of nowhere becomes deeply paranoid, when he becomes aggressively accusatory, when he becomes obsessed with security cameras and tracking locations, 99% of the time, he is projecting. I stared at him, my brain refusing to process the word. Projecting? Men who are hiding massive, incredibly dangerous secrets often become deeply paranoid that they are the ones being watched, Marcus explained patiently. Or they aggressively accuse their wives of cheating in order to justify their own erratic, secretive behavior. It's a defense mechanism. They create a massive smokescreen of chaos to hide the fire they started. I shook my head violently, panic rising in my chest. No, 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 Mark isn't cheating. You don't understand, Marcus. He is terrified. He sleeps with a baseball bat by the door. He is losing his mind with fear. He thinks someone is physically coming after him. A cheater doesn't act like a man who is about to be assassinated. We'll see, Marcus said quietly, not arguing with me. He just scooped the envelope of cash off the desk and locked it in his drawer. Give me exactly 2 weeks. Do not act differently. Do not confront him. Just play the part of the exhausted wife. I will call you when I have the truth. Those 14 days were the longest, most excruciating, agonizing days of my entire life. I had to go home every single night, walk past the glaring black dome cameras, and play the part of the devoted, wrongly accused wife, while internally screaming with anxiety over what Marcus's surveillance team might be finding outside my windows. Mark's paranoia was reaching an absolute, terrifying fever pitch during this period. One Saturday, he refused to let me leave the house to go to the grocery store. He stood in front of the door, physically blocking my path, claiming he saw a strange man walking a dog past our house 3 times, and he knew it was my lover trying to signal me. I had to order groceries on an app, and Mark watched the delivery driver through the camera feed, refusing to open the door until the driver was back in his car. He was a tightly coiled spring, ready to violently snap at any moment. I was living with a walking time bomb. On day 14, at exactly 10:15 a.m., my cell phone buzzed violently on my desk at work. I looked down. It was Marcus. I picked up the phone, my heart slamming against my ribs. Hello? Sarah, Marcus said. His voice wasn't gruff anymore. It was tight, urgent. I need you to leave work and come to my office right now, right this second. Do not call your husband. Do not tell anyone where you are going. Just get here. I felt the bottom completely drop out of my stomach. The tone of his voice told me everything I needed to know. The world tilted on its axis. I grabbed my purse, blindly told my creative director I had a severe family emergency, sprinted to the parking garage, and drove into the city. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grip the steering wheel. I ran 3 red lights. When I walked into Marcus's office, he didn't offer me coffee. He didn't make small talk. He was standing behind his desk, looking grim. He didn't say a word. He just picked up a massive, thick, heavy manila folder and slid it across the scratched wooden desk toward me. I don't even know how to preface this, Sarah, Marcus said, his voice sounding slightly stunned. And this was a man who had seen decades of human depravity. So I'm just going to show you. Open the folder. My hands trembled as I reached out, flipped the metal clasp, and opened the heavy cover. The first page was a massive 8x10 high-resolution photograph. It was taken through the window of a dimly lit, incredibly upscale, romantic Italian restaurant in the city. Sitting at a corner booth, bathed in candlelight, was Mark. He was wearing the custom charcoal suit he told me he wore for important client dinners. He was leaning across the table, a soft, intimate smile on his face. And sitting directly across from him, her hands completely enveloped in his, was a stunningly beautiful blonde woman. She was wearing a red silk dress. I had never seen her before in my entire life. I stared at the photograph. The air completely left my lungs. The walls of the office seemed to close in on me. Marcus was right. The paranoia, the accusations, the absolute terror, the late nights at the office. It was all projection. He was having a massive, full-blown affair. The absolute crushing weight of the betrayal hit me like a physical, heavy blow to the chest. 2 years of my life, my sanity, my health, sacrificed on the altar of his lies. But before I could even process the profound grief, before the tears could even form in my eyes, Marcus leaned forward, reached across the desk, and tapped the photograph with his index finger. "Keep looking, Sarah," he said darkly. "That's just the appetizer." I swallowed hard, my mouth completely dry, and turned to the next photo. It was taken from a different angle, outside the restaurant on the street level. It showed Mark and the beautiful blonde woman walking closely together toward Mark's Audi, laughing. But Marcus had circled something in the background with a thick red marker. Standing in the deep shadows of an alleyway directly across the street from the restaurant, partially obscured by a dumpster, was a man. A tall, heavily built, muscular man, wearing a dark leather jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He was standing perfectly still, staring directly at Mark and the blonde woman, with a posture that screamed pure, predatory violence. "Who is that?" I whispered, my voice trembling so hard I could barely form the words. "That," Marcus said grimly, sitting down heavily in his chair, "is David Vance. He is a prominent, highly connected local commercial real estate developer. He is notoriously aggressive, has a long history of violent assault charges that miraculously get dropped by intimidated witnesses, and is known in the city for having a terrifying, explosive temper." Marcus paused, letting the silence hang heavily in the stale air of the office before delivering the absolute, reality-shattering death blow. "David Vance is also the husband of the blonde woman in that picture. Her name is Chloe. Your husband, Mark, has been aggressively sleeping with Chloe Vance for the last 8 months." I literally couldn't speak. My brain was completely short-circuiting, sparks flying, trying to connect the massive, terrifying dots. I looked from the glossy photo of the smiling blonde woman to the grainy, terrifying photo of the shadowy, looming man in the alleyway. "Okay," I stammered, my heart pounding so hard it physically hurt my ribs. "Okay, so Mark is cheating on me with a married woman, and her violent husband found out?" Marcus nodded slowly, sliding another thick stack of surveillance photos toward me. "He didn't just find out, Sarah. David Vance has been actively, relentlessly stalking your husband for the last 3 months. My team pulled municipal security footage from the streets around your office, Mark's office, and your suburban neighborhood. Look at these photos." I flipped through them rapidly. There was a photo of a dark gray sedan parked 3 houses down from my home. The license plate was registered to David Vance's commercial holding company. There was a photo of David Vance walking past my mailbox. There was a photo of David Vance standing by the back fence of my yard in the rain. "David Vance is the man in the dark sedan your husband saw that night," Marcus explained, his voice low and urgent. "David Vance is the one who left the blank envelope in your mailbox as a threat. David Vance is the one who was standing outside your bedroom window leaving footprints in the mud." The realization hit me so hard and so incredibly fast, it made me physically nauseous. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling out of the chair. Mark wasn't crazy. He wasn't hallucinating. He wasn't having a stress-induced breakdown. He actually was being stalked. He actually was being hunted, monitored, and terrorized by the violently angry, unhinged husband of the woman he was aggressively sleeping with. Mark knew exactly who was sitting in the black sedan. He knew exactly who left the blank envelope. He knew exactly whose heavy boot print was pressed into the mud outside the patio door. But instead of acting like a man, instead of confessing his massive, dangerous affair to me, apologizing, and going to the police to protect his home, Mark used his own wife as a human shield. He flipped the entire terrifying narrative. He brilliantly, psychopathically gaslit me into believing that I was the one having a secret affair, and that the violent stalker lurking outside our house was my deranged, obsessed lover. He used my supposed infidelity as the ultimate bulletproof cover story to explain why our house was suddenly a target, why he was spending thousands of dollars installing military-grade security cameras, and why he was acting like a terrified, cornered animal every time he walked out the front door. He didn't install the interior cameras to catch me cheating. He installed the cameras to watch out for David Vance, because he was genuinely, deeply terrified that David was going to break into our house in the middle of the night and murder him in his sleep. And he blamed the entire, terrifying, life-threatening situation on me. He allowed me to aggressively question my own sanity. He allowed me to lose my friends. He allowed me to waste away into an anxious, depressed, trembling shell of a human being, completely alone in my own home, taking the blame for a monster he brought to my front door. I sat in Marcus's office, surrounded by the photographic evidence of my destroyed life, and I didn't cry. The tears from the last 2 years completely dried up. I didn't scream. I didn't break down. Instead, I felt a cold, absolute, horrifying rage settle deep into my bones. The kind of rage that burns so cold it feels like liquid nitrogen in your veins. "Sarah," Marcus said softly, breaking the heavy silence, leaning forward with genuine concern in his eyes. "This is a highly volatile, highly dangerous situation. David Vance is completely unstable. He is looking for an opportunity. Mark has brought a violent, unpredictable predator directly to your front door and left you completely in the dark as collateral damage. You need to pack a bag today, right now. Go to a secure hotel, and we will file for an emergency restraining order against both of them. Let the police handle this. You need to get out of the blast radius." I looked down at the photos scattered across the desk. I looked at Mark's smug, handsome face holding Chloe's hands, smiling like he owned the world. I looked at the dark, menacing silhouette of David Vance standing in the alleyway, gripping his fists. And then I looked back at Marcus. "No," I said. My voice was completely steady. It didn't tremble. It didn't shake. It sounded like the voice of a stranger. "Sarah, please be rational," Marcus started. "If I go to the police right now," I interrupted, my eyes completely cold, "Mark will absolutely spin it. He's a wealthy financial analyst. He'll hire the most expensive, aggressive lawyers in the city. He'll claim David Vance is just a crazy client, or he'll claim he had absolutely no idea Chloe was married. He'll find a way to make himself the poor, innocent victim, just like he always, always does. He destroyed 2 years of my life, Marcus. He systematically dismantled my mind. He made me think I was losing my sanity. He trapped me in a high-security prison of his own making and convinced me I was the criminal." I gathered the photos carefully, meticulously stacking them, and slid them back into the thick manila folder. I picked up the folder and held it to my chest. "I am not running away to a hotel," I said, standing up from the chair. "I am going to end this. And I am going to make absolutely sure that Mark's carefully constructed little nightmare blows up directly, violently, and publicly in his face." And honestly, if you've ever dealt with a deeply manipulative, narcissistic partner who uses your empathy, your love, and your sanity as weapons against you, you already know exactly where this is going. You know that there is no satisfying, peaceful resolution in simply walking away. They need to be exposed to the blinding light. They need to be forced to face the exact, terrifying monster they created. I spent the next 3 days acting perfectly, sickeningly normal. It took every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I went home, cooked dinner, washed the dishes, and let Mark interrogate me about my day at work. I absorbed his paranoid, frantic rants about my imaginary stalker with a calm, subdued, defeated demeanor. I let him check my phone. I let him watch the cameras. But inside, behind my blank eyes, I was meticulously, coldly constructing a flawless trap. Marcus, despite his deep reservations about my safety, agreed to help me orchestrate the complicated logistics. To make this work, I needed 3 specific things to align perfectly. First, I needed Mark and Chloe to be in the exact same place at the exact same time. Second, I needed David Vance to know exactly where they were, but under false pretenses. Third, I needed to be completely, physically absent from the blast zone, but I needed absolute, undeniable, high-definition proof of the confrontation for the divorce courts. The setup was beautifully, terrifyingly simple. Mark had told me earlier in the week that he had a mandatory weekend strategy retreat for his firm's senior partners coming up on Saturday. He claimed they were renting a large cabin upstate for team-building exercises and fourth-quarter financial planning. I knew from Marcus's ongoing surveillance that there was absolutely no corporate retreat. Mark had actually rented a luxury, high-end Airbnb apartment downtown for him and Chloe to spend the weekend together, believing that David Vance would be completely out of town attending a regional real estate conference. On Friday morning, Mark packed his expensive leather overnight bag. He stood in the foyer, gave me a rigid, paranoid kiss on the cheek, and looked me dead in the eyes. "Keep the alarm armed at all times, Sarah," he commanded, his voice tight with fake concern, looking out the front window one last time. "Do not leave the house under any circumstances this weekend. Order your food in. If your stalker shows up, call 911 immediately, and then call me. Do not engage with him. You have no idea how dangerous this guy is." The absolute unmitigated gall of this man to look me dead in the eyes, pretending to care about my safety, while explicitly warning me about the violent danger he personally brought to my door. It took everything in me not to spit in his face. I smiled sweetly, touched his arm, and told him I would be perfectly safe. The absolute second his Audi pulled out of the driveway, I went to work. The clock was ticking. I didn't pack my bags. I didn't leave the house. I simply waited. Because my plan didn't involve the luxury Airbnb downtown. My plan involved the one place on earth Mark felt completely, totally secure. The one place he had rigged with thousands of dollars of high-definition security cameras to monitor his own paranoia. Our home. You see, Marcus had discovered something incredibly crucial during his surveillance sweeps. David Vance wasn't just physically following Mark's car. He was tracking Mark electronically. But Mark, in his infinite, arrogant stupidity, didn't know that. At exactly 2 p.m., I put on a pair of latex gloves and pulled a cheap, prepaid burner phone out of my purse, a phone I had purchased with cash at a convenience store 2 towns over. I typed a single, anonymous text message to David Vance's personal cell phone, a number Marcus had easily procured from public corporate records. The text read, "Your wife isn't at the spa this weekend. She's with Mark Vance. They are heading back to his house in the suburbs right now to pack her bags. They are leaving the state together. 442 Elmwood Drive. If you want to catch them, hurry." It was a total, complete lie. Mark and Chloe were safe and sound, drinking champagne in their luxury Airbnb downtown. But David Vance didn't know that. All he knew was that his wife was missing, Mark's car was parked downtown, and an anonymous tip was telling him that the ultimate betrayal was happening inside Mark's suburban fortress. At 3 p.m., I used the exact same burner phone to send a massive, frantic text message directly to Mark. "Mark, emergency! The alarm company just called my cell. Someone smashed the back patio glass door. They are inside the house. I am locked in the master bathroom upstairs. He is screaming your name. Please hurry. Don't call the police. He has a gun and said he'll shoot me if he hears sirens. Just get here now. Help me." I hit send. I immediately turned off the burner phone, snapped the plastic casing in half, broke the SIM card, and threw the pieces into the bottom of the kitchen trash can under the coffee grounds. Then, I walked slowly into the center of the living room. I stood in front of the sofa, looked up into the upper corner of the room, and stared directly into the black dome security camera. The exact camera that recorded audio and video. The exact camera Mark checked obsessively from his phone. I smiled directly into the glass lens. "I know, Mark," I said clearly, my voice echoing loudly in the empty, silent house. "I know about Chloe. I know about David Vance. I know you used me. I know absolutely everything. Welcome home." I turned around, grabbed my purse, and walked out the front door, leaving it wide open to the afternoon breeze. I walked down the street, got into my car, and drove exactly 3 blocks away, turning down a quiet cul-de-sac. Marcus was parked there in his unmarked, dark gray surveillance van. I climbed into the passenger seat and slammed the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. Marcus had his heavy-duty laptop open on the center console, patched directly into our home's Wi-Fi network using the passwords I provided. On his bright screen was the live, high-definition 4K feed of my living room, my kitchen, my driveway, and my front porch. The grid of cameras showed my empty house, waiting for the collision. "You absolutely sure about this, Sarah?" Marcus asked gruffly, his eyes glued to the screen, his hand resting near his radio. "Once this plays out, there is no unringing this bell. This is going to get ugly." "I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life," I replied, staring unblinking at the monitors, my hands folded tightly in my lap. We waited in tense, suffocating, agonizing silence for exactly 22 minutes. At 3:25 p.m., the driveway camera feed lit up with motion. Mark's sleek, expensive Audi violently pulled into the driveway, the tires loudly screeching and smoking against the concrete. He threw the car into park so aggressively, the vehicle rocked back and forth. He didn't even shut the driver's door. He sprinted toward the open front door of the house. He looked completely, utterly unhinged. Panic was radiating from every single pore of his body. He genuinely thought his wife was being held hostage in the bathroom by a deranged man with a gun. He ran into the living room, screaming my name at the top of his lungs. "Sarah, Sarah, where are you?" He sprinted into the kitchen, looking wildly around. He ran upstairs, disappearing from the main camera feeds for a few terrifying moments as he frantically searched the master bathroom and the bedrooms. He came sprinting back down the stairs, out of breath, looking wildly around the empty living room. He realized the back patio door wasn't smashed. He realized the house was completely, totally empty. He pulled out his cell phone, frantically dialing my number. On the living room feed, we watched my actual cell phone, which I had deliberately left sitting face up on the ruined coffee table directly under the camera, begin to buzz and light up. Mark stared at the buzzing phone. We watched the profound confusion on his face slowly, agonizingly morph into absolute paralyzing dread. He slowly looked up. He looked directly at the black dome camera in the corner of the room, the exact camera I had spoken into just 25 minutes prior. He realized I had left the phone. He realized I had sent the text. But before he could even begin to process the devastating realization that he had been completely, flawlessly played, the driveway camera feed lit up again. A massive, black, heavily modified Ford F-150 truck roared up to the curb, violently jumping the sidewalk, crushing my flower beds and parking directly on our pristine front lawn. The heavy driver's door flew open, and David Vance stepped out. He was even more terrifying in high-definition video than he was in the grainy surveillance photographs. He was practically vibrating with raw, unadulterated rage. He was wearing heavy boots, and he was holding a solid steel crowbar in his right hand. He didn't walk up the pathway to the front door. He marched across the grass like an executioner heading to a guillotine. Inside the living room, Mark heard the massive truck engine shut off. We watched on the feed as Mark's face instantly drained of all remaining color. He backed away from the front door, stumbling over the edge of the rug, his hands trembling violently. David Vance walked heavily onto the wooden porch. He didn't even bother turning the handle of the open door. He swung the heavy steel crowbar with devastating, terrifying force, completely shattering the decorative glass panel next to the door, reaching his large arm through the jagged glass and unlocking the deadbolt himself, just to make a point. He kicked the heavy oak door open and stepped into my living room. I sat in the van with Marcus, holding my breath, my fingernails digging deeply into my palms, watching the two men face off on the television screen. It was like watching a Greek tragedy violently unfold in my own suburban living room. "Where is she, Mark?" David bellowed, his voice so incredibly loud it distorted the audio microphone on the camera. He raised the steel crowbar, pointing it directly at Mark's chest. "Where is my wife?" Mark was literally backed against the drywall, his hands raised defensively in front of his face, stammering incoherently. The arrogant, composed, manipulative sociopath who had psychologically tortured me for 2 solid years was completely, entirely gone. In his place was a terrified, pathetic, sniveling coward. "David, please, listen to me," Mark begged, his voice cracking violently into a high pitch. "She isn't here. I swear to God, David, she isn't here. I don't know where she is." "You lying piece of trash," David roared, taking a massive, heavy step forward and violently swinging the crowbar downward into our custom glass-top coffee table. The thick glass shattered with an explosive, deafening crash, sending thousands of sharp shards flying across the expensive Persian rug. Mark flinched hard, screaming in genuine terror, covering his head. "Wait, wait, I can prove it! Look around the house, she's not here! Her bags aren't here, we weren't running!" "Then why the hell are you here, Mark?" David screamed, dropping the crowbar, grabbing Mark by the collar of his expensive dress shirt and slamming him violently against the drywall. The impact knocked a framed picture off the wall. "Why did you run back here in the middle of the afternoon if you weren't trying to pack her bags? Where is she?" Mark was hyperventilating, tears of sheer panic streaming down his face as he desperately tried to process the lie that had brought him here. "Sarah texted me, my wife. She texted me from a strange number and said there was an emergency. She said someone broke in with a gun." David stopped. He froze in place. He stared at Mark, his face twisted in utter, deep confusion. "Your wife? Your wife texted you?" "Yes," Mark sobbed, pointing a shaking, desperate finger at my cell phone, resting among the shattered glass of the coffee table. "She set me up, David. She must have set me up. I didn't know you were coming." David slowly released Mark's collar, stepping backward, his brain rapidly processing the new information. He looked around the empty, silent room. He looked at the shattered glass. He looked at the open front door. And finally, slowly, he looked directly up at the black dome camera in the corner of the room. The exact camera I was watching him through. I leaned closer to the laptop screen in the dark van, my heart pounding a fierce, triumphant rhythm. "Realize it, David. Realize you've both been played by the woman you ignored." David looked back at Mark. A sickeningly dark, terrifying smile slowly spread across his face. He finally understood the complex geometry of the trap. He realized that the anonymous text he received earlier wasn't from a concerned neighbor or a friend. It was from the wife Mark had been systematically destroying. "Well, Mark," David said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, even register. "It looks like your wife is significantly smarter than you are, and it looks like you are completely, totally out of excuses." What happened next wasn't pretty. It wasn't cinematic in a heroic Hollywood way. It was violent, ugly, chaotic, and brutal. David didn't pick the crowbar back up, but he didn't need to. He grabbed Mark by the shoulders, threw him violently over the back of the sofa, and proceeded to unleash 3 solid months of paranoid, obsessive, betrayed rage using his bare fists. Mark screamed. He begged for his life. He tried to fight back, swinging wildly, but David was bigger, stronger, and fueled by absolute unhinged adrenaline. Furniture crashed. Lamps shattered. Marcus, sitting calmly next to me in the driver's seat of the van, casually reached forward and pressed a button on his radio console. "Police are exactly 4 minutes away, Sarah," he said calmly, not taking his eyes off the screen. I called dispatch the absolute second David's truck jumped the curb. Anonymous report of a violent home invasion in progress with a weapon. I nodded slowly, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. I watched the man who had psychologically tortured me, who had convinced me I was losing my mind, who had driven me to the absolute brink of a complete mental breakdown, sobbing and bleeding heavily on his own living room floor, caught inextricably in the exact, expensive surveillance trap he had built to control me. When the police finally arrived, 4 squad cars with sirens blaring, tires screeching on the asphalt, the scene they walked into was completely, undeniably damning. Officers rushed through the open front door with their weapons drawn. David Vance was arrested on the spot, tackled to the floor, handcuffed, and charged with aggravated assault, breaking and entering, and severe destruction of private property. Mark was treated by paramedics in our driveway, bleeding profusely from his face, before being loaded into an ambulance and taken to the hospital with a broken nose, 3 fractured ribs, a severe concussion, and multiple lacerations. I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't go to the police station. I didn't answer the panicked calls from his family. I went to a luxury hotel downtown, booked the nicest suite available, ordered an obscenely expensive bottle of champagne through room service, took a hot bath, and slept for 14 straight, uninterrupted hours. It was the very first time in 2 entire years that I slept without waking up in a cold sweat, without wondering who was watching me through the windows, and without fearing the man lying next to me in bed. The fallout from that afternoon was absolutely spectacular. It was total annihilation. When Mark was finally discharged from the hospital 3 days later, he tried to call me. He left 20 desperate, pleading, pathetic voicemails. He tried to play the victim all over again. He claimed he was forced into the affair, that David Vance had threatened his life, that he didn't tell me about the affair only because he was trying to protect me from the danger. I didn't answer a single call. I didn't need to. I handed all the evidence over to the most vicious, bloodthirsty, expensive divorce attorney I could find in the city. I gave her Marcus's massive private investigator report. I gave her the detailed timeline of Mark's extreme psychological abuse and gaslighting. I gave her the financial records proving his massive expenditures on Chloe while he was monitoring my grocery receipts. And, most importantly, I gave her the downloaded high-definition video footage of the entire violent confrontation in our living room. Because Mark had installed those cameras himself, the footage was perfectly legally admissible in court. It proved unequivocally that he had engaged in a highly dangerous affair that directly resulted in a violent home invasion. It proved he had jeopardized my physical safety and my life by bringing a known violent stalker to our front door and leaving me there as bait. My attorney absolutely decimated him in mediation. It was a bloodbath. I didn't just get the house. I got the vast majority of his liquid assets, his retirement funds, and a massive ongoing alimony settlement based on extreme emotional distress, psychological abuse, and physical endangerment. I also secured a permanent ironclad restraining order that mandated he could never come within 500 feet of me again. Mark's entire life imploded. His prestigious wealth management firm fired him immediately when the police report of the violent altercation and the affair became public, citing a strict morality and public conduct clause in his senior partnership contract. Chloe, absolutely terrified of her husband's impending prison sentence and publicly humiliated by the exposure of the affair, filed for divorce and completely cut Mark out of her life, blocking his number and moving out of state. Mark went from being a wealthy, arrogant, controlling sociopath living in a heavily surveilled suburban fortress to an unemployed, publicly disgraced, broken man living in a cheap rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. He is currently completely alone, constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the day David Vance finally gets released from jail. His paranoia finally became his permanent, inescapable reality. He built his own prison. I sold the house immediately. I couldn't live there anymore. Every single time I looked at the sofa, or the kitchen island, or the corners of the ceiling where the cameras used to be, I felt the heavy, suffocating ghost of his presence looming over me. I took my massive divorce settlement, quit my job at the marketing agency, and started my own independent freelance design firm. I bought a beautiful, bright, airy loft in the city with massive floor-to-ceiling windows, lots of natural light, and absolutely zero security cameras. It has been exactly 18 months since that explosive afternoon. And while the massive financial settlement and the poetic justice were incredibly satisfying on a surface level, the actual internal healing process has been slow, painful, and deeply exhausting. You don't just bounce back from 2 solid years of extreme systemic gaslighting. You don't just shake it off. There are still days when I misplace my car keys and instantly panic, my brain automatically assuming that someone took them to punish me or test me. There are still nights when an unfamiliar car parks outside my loft building for a little too long, and I feel a cold, sharp spike of pure adrenaline shoot through my chest. But I am healing. I am in intensive, trauma-focused therapy twice a week. I am learning how to trust my own reality again. I am slowly learning how to recognize the absolute truth of my own experiences without desperately needing a man to validate them for me. Before I sign off tonight, I want to leave you with this final thought. Please listen to me. If you are watching this and your partner is constantly, relentlessly accusing you of things you haven't done, if they are excessively monitoring your movements, checking your phone, auditing your time, and demanding absolute, terrifying transparency while offering absolutely none in return, do not assume they are just insecure. Do not assume they just love you too much to lose you. Do not mistake control for passion. People who are violently terrified of being deceived are almost always the ones actively doing the deceiving. They project their own immense guilt, their own dirty secrets, and their own terror onto the closest available target. They will build a high-security prison around you, lock the door from the outside, and tell you it is a fortress meant to keep you safe from the monsters. They will systematically make you think you are going crazy, so that you are too busy aggressively defending your own sanity to investigate their reality. Trust your gut. Always trust your gut. Hire the private investigator. Open the locked drawer in the desk. Check the bank statements. Look at the phone bills. Do not let them dim your light or violently twist your perception of the truth. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And you have the absolute, undeniable power to tear down the prison they built for you. Lock them inside with their own demons and throw away the key forever. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it was incredibly long, and I know it was heavy. But if this helps even one woman realize that the monster isn't hiding outside the house in the dark, but sitting right next to her on the sofa in the living room, then dragging all of this pain into the light was entirely worth it. Stay safe out there, everyone. Protect your peace, and never ever let anyone tell you that what you know to be true isn't. Good night.